Okay, this is the IA3 practice test. Number one, what you have to do is you have to realize that this is a negative exponent, which means you need to reciprocate, make it a fraction, and then make the exponent positive. Number two, here is a composition of functions, which means you have to evaluate the inner function first. The inner function is h. So you take negative h as the input, plug it in here, evaluate. Whatever the answer is, the result from the inner function, take that and evaluate the outer function with this. So take the answer from this, plug it in here, and evaluate the outer function of g. Number three, this is straightforward. Multiply the numerator and denominator by the conjugate of 7 minus radical 11, which is 7 plus radical 11. Number four, here we have a complex fraction, and I've gotten you started here by finding the least common denominator, which is c, and that's true for the upper fraction and the lower fractions. So what you want to do is rewrite a and d as fractions over 1, and we're going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by c. Same with down here. You end up with this expression. Add and subtract the fractions. So we're basically going to add these or combine like terms, so it's going to share the denominator of c. Finally, keep change flip. So instead of division, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. You'll see that some of these terms will cancel out, and you're left with one of these answer choices. Here we're using the the completing the square method to solve this quadratic. As you can see, this is already in a perfect square binomial, so we take the square root of both sides. Don't forget to extract I out of this because you cannot take the square root of a negative number. Now remember, 1 to 1 means that you can only have exactly one arrow that connects an element in the domain to exactly one element in the range. Onto means that there are no leftovers in the range. Okay, so as you can see, here's a leftover right here, so the answer cannot be 4. Number 7, I've written down all the given information. Quarterly is tricky here. That means 4 times a year. Okay, so n in the equation here, in the formula, n is the number of times of year that the interest is compounded. Okay, now remember that the interest rate needs to be written as a decimal, and everything else is here, so just plug it in the calculator exactly as you see it to get your final answer, which is the result in 5 years, how much money that has turned into. Number 8, as you can see, this is not in standard form, so we need to subtract 9x from both sides, giving you 0 over here. And I'm going to go ahead and solve using the quadratic formula. So this is a trigonometry question. Sine of A equals negative 7/25. Angle A terminates in the quadrant 4. So here's quadrant 4, and negative 7/25 is sine. So here's angle A. Here's opposite is negative 7. Hypotenuse is 25. Now I know that this is negative 7 because 25 is the hypotenuse, and that is always a positive value. Okay, this makes sense. It's negative 7 because we're going downward, so the y value is negative here. They want to know what's tangent of A. Well, you've got to use tangent as opposite over adjacent. So once you find out what this value is for this side of the right triangle using the Pythagorean theorem, then you can find out what is opposite over adjacent. All right, here's the general form of the equation of a circle, and we're going to complete the square twice in order to rewrite this into center radius form. First thing you do is subtract 53 from both sides, and then you sort out your equation, put the x's together, put the y's together, and then you have plus box, and those same 2 boxes over on this side. I want to remind you that in order to find the number that goes in here, we need to take the b term, the coefficient of x, and it's b over 2 all squared. So it's negative 16 divided by 2, and then square that goes in there. Same thing with this, 6 divided by 2, square it goes in there. Those same 2 numbers need to be added to this side as well. Now remember, when they ask for what's the domain and range, what's limiting here is that we have a fraction. So whatever the denominator evaluates to, it cannot be 0. Also, it cannot be negative because it's a radical. So this is sort of a double whammy here. And in order to find the range, what I suggest is you plug in a bunch of x values to test out which y values are the result. You could also just graph this in your graphing calculator to see what the shape of the graph looks like, and you can sort of base your range on that. Here's the formula for sum and product of roots. The sum is negative b over a, and the product is c over a. All right, a, b, and c are given, pulled right out of here. They're all the coefficients of the quadratic equation. What I would do first here is since they're both cube roots, I would just go ahead and multiply these together. So you do 27 times 16 and x squared times x to the 4th, which is x to the 6th. And then finally you can simplify the cube root. You can also just take the cube root of both of them and take their answers and multiply them together. So either way you want to do it is fine. All right, over here you have to factor everything possible, keep, change, flip, and then simplify. Here's your trinomial, here's your difference of squares. Now remember, an inverse is always the same picture but reflected in the line y equals x. Here's the line y equals x. It's that diagonal line that goes from quadrant 1 to quadrant 3. So think about what y equals a to the x would look like. You could also just plug in any number for a, any positive number. As you can see, it says a is greater than 1. And you could just test out to see what it looks like, and then you can just reflect it across this line. So here we have a fractional inequality. You want to get rid of this fraction by multiplying both sides by x minus 2. Then you want to distribute the 7 times x minus 2 and simplify, getting x by itself, and then the rest is pretty much pretty typical Algebra 1 material. You just want to solve for x and then write your inequality. Number 17 is a little tricky. You want to write in the invisible 1, and then you're going to factor out x plus 2 from each of these terms as if you were factoring by grouping. And once you do that, you'll see that you're left with, x plus 2 gets pulled out, and then x squared minus 1 is left, and x squared minus 1 is a difference of squared. All right, you're changing 5 radians to degrees. Now remember, that's not 5 pi radians, it's just 5 radians, so this pi has to stay there because you can't cancel out pi. You can only cancel out the word radians. Okay, so you just multiply straight across, and you'll find your answer in there. All right, number 19, you have a couple different methods. You can plug in x, so you take 0, you plug it in here. 2 to the 0 power is 1, right? Plug in 0 down here, 2 times 0 is not 1, so you know the answer cannot be 2. Another method is you graph each of these in your calculator, then you hit table, and then you compare the ordered pairs to see if it matches up the x and y values in the table. Number 20, you want to factor out I. So as you can see, radical negative 300 is just radical negative 1 times radical 300. Radical negative 1 becomes I, and then radical 300 can be broken down to radical 100 times radical 3, and radical 100 is a perfect square. You want to rewrite number 21 in standard form, subtract 9 from both sides, and then apply the quadratic formula. Pretty typical problem. Number 22, you want to use the properties of logarithms that I gave you over here to apply to this expression and rewrite. Basically, you're condensing, not expanding, for number 22. Okay, for number 23, which relation is not a function, you have method 1, which is to solve for y and graph each one of these in the calculator and use the vertical line test. The second method is just to see which one of the y values is squared, and if it's squared, that means the function is conical, meaning it's a circle or some sort of ellipse or an oval shape, which is not a function. Number 24, you have an exponential equation, so you want to rewrite this using common bases. Okay? Once you do that, I did the first step where you distribute your powers, cancel the common bases, then solve the equation. Number 25, if you're ever stuck, just take your answer choices and plug them back in to see which one works out for the equation. If you want to do it the algebraic way, you want to undo the radical by squaring both sides, and don't forget to FOIL 3 minus x. Number 26, what I would do first is simplify, so we know that I to the 7th times I to the 5th is really I to the 12th because you add powers. Finally, your I powers, if you forgot what I to the 1st, I to the 2nd, I to the 3rd, and I to the 4th power are, you can always plug them in the calculator because the calculator does those for you. And number 27, you're going to use SOHCAHTOA. Specifically, you're going to use cosine because 5 and 6 are basically the adjacent and the hypotenuse sides, with k being the angle of perspective. Once you set it up, you have cosine of k equals 5 over 6, and you want to use the inverse cosine of both sides. Finally, they want it to the nearest minute, so you have to use the calculator and use DMS. All right, we want to take 28 and put this transfer degrees to radians. So remember, you have to cancel degrees, meaning you're going to end up with pi on top divided by 180 degrees. All right, number 29. Since we know that the inverse of cosecant is sine, we can really just find what is the sine, what ratio represents sine of A, and then whatever that fraction is, the reciprocal of that fraction would be cosecant of A. Number 30, you want to reciprocate the negative exponents first, then distribute your power to power. Number 31, you want to rationalize the denominator, meaning you want to multiply the numerator and denominator by this radical, 3a squared b. You could also just free up the a squared first, because the square root of a squared is just a. So that would give you less to rationalize. Number 32, this is a transformation. Specifically, when you have f of x plus 5, this plus 5 is outside the parentheses, which means it's a vertical shift. It means that you're actually shifting this up 5 units. So if your minimum point is -1, -3, you're actually adding 5 to this ordered pair. Number 33, the conjugate is simply the opposite sign of the second term. Good luck.